Hey guys, so today we're going to start a new lesson, lesson 7.1, Cell Discovery and Theory. All right, so our focus question is, how did the invention of the microscope lead to discovery of cells? So our basic idea of this lesson is we're going to be talking about different types of microscopes and different parts of cell theory, meaning like how did we discover cells and how do we define a cell and what different types of cells are there? Okay? All right, so maybe you have heard of some of these. I know you have because you've been learning about cells for a long time. You know what a cell is. You definitely know what a plasma membrane is. It's the outside of the cell. You probably remember prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells and organelles and nuclei. We're going to get a little deeper into them, and let's get started. So, the history of cell theory. The human body is made up of trillions of cells, okay? So every cell in our body works together to keep us alive. So for example, cells in my body can die and they'll be replaced with new cells, but they all rely on each other to work together to keep each other alive. So for example, the cells in my arms, like the muscle cells, they can't breathe, but they still require oxygen, and they rely on the blood cells to bring oxygen to them. So they all have to work together. All right, so remember, you probably do remember this. A group of cells working together is called a tissue. A group of tissues together is called an organ, and an organ does a specialized job in your body. So for example, the stomach helps to digest food. A group of organs together, like here you have the stomach, the large intestine, the small intestine, the esophagus, they're all working together to form an organ system. And of course, one organ system does not work on its own. It needs all the other organ systems together, and all the organ systems working together creates an organism, which is the living thing overall, right? And all of this starts off with the most basic building block, which is a cell. All right, so let's talk about cells. People didn't always know that they existed. In fact, for a long time, people had no idea about them whatsoever. So one of the first light microscopes to be made, we're going to get a lot deeper into light microscopes throughout this lesson, was like this. So this was created by a man called Robert Hooke, and basically inside there's a whole bunch of lenses that allow you to zoom in on an image and make it look larger. And he used to use a candle to help light up the sample. This is a really, really old version of a microscope, but still it worked and it helped us out a lot in discovering what cells are. So a man called Robert Hooke zoomed in and used his microscope to look at a piece of cork. Cork is like a piece of wood, you know. And he noticed that when you zoomed in deep enough, the cork was made up of tiny little empty squares. The reason they were empty is because he was looking at dead cells, so they were already basically evacuated of all of their cellular material. But he decided, wow, living things, or maybe not all living things because he wasn't sure about that, but cork at least is made up of cells. So the reason he called them cells is because they look like little rooms, and cell is just a word for a small room, right? So he was the guy who first discovered and named cells. Robert Hooke, okay guys? Don't forget that name. Okay, and then after a long time, after this discovery, many scientists decided to dig deeper. So some scientists decided, are plants also made of cells? Are animals also made of cells? And they came up with a unified cell theory. The cell theory consists of three different things. Number one, all organisms are composed of one or more cells. Cells are the basic unit and structure and organization of all living organisms, and cells arise only from previously existing cells, with cells passing copies of their genetic material to their daughter cells. So let's go ahead and look at this. First of all living organisms are composed of one or more cells. You can see here, plants are made of cells. Inside of these, you can see all the little chloroplasts. That's what those are. Animals are also made of cells. Humans are also made of cells. Fungus is also made of cells, so this is yeast. This is the stuff that you put in your bread to help it puff up and become, fluffy and stuff. Remember, we learned about that back in fermentation. And even bacteria are made of cells. Some organisms are only made up of one cell, like the fungus and the bacteria, while some organisms are made up of many cells working together to create an entire organism, like plants and animals and humans. All right. Cells are the basic unit of structure and organization of all living things. So, in order for this living thing to be alive, and also this, you need all of your cells working together to actually allow different jobs to happen inside of your body. But the most basic unit of structure and function is the cell. A group of cells is called a tissue, a group of tissues is called an organ, a group of organs is called an organ system, and then you get the organism. But it all starts down here with the cell. And finally, cells arise only from previously existing cells, with cells passing copies of their genetic material to their daughter cells. This basically means that to get new cells, you need previously existing and living cells. If I went and I killed all the bacteria on the table, like if I went and I cleaned my table and all of it was gone, no new bacteria would come in unless if one of them survived or if some of it blew in with the wind or on somebody's hands or something like that. But basically, cells need to come from other cells. And their genetic material comes from the cell that they came from. So let's go ahead and look over here. This is just an example of cell division taking place. I'm going to turn this off just because. So you can see here a little bit back. The first thing that's happening is that 2 copies of each piece of DNA are being made. So you have 2 red, 2 yellow, 2 blue, and 2 light blue. Then later on, 1 copy of each of the DNA goes to each half of the dividing cell, which means that the new cell is going to have the exact same DNA as the previous cell, right? And then eventually, when all the DNA is separated properly, the cell divides and becomes 2 new identical cells. Okay? So let's go over that again. Cell division, DNA gets separated, and you get 2 new identical cells. And you guys can also look over here. I sent you guys this simulation so you can watch it on your own too. All right, now let's take another look over here. Here, this is an example of how bacteria start to actually divide. So we'll start with a few. As you can see here, we did not start from nothing, right? We started from 3 pieces of bacteria. Now each one of them is dividing, and look at how quickly these divide. And suddenly they are covering everything. In fact, even in a lab, if you are working with bacteria, you just put a couple of different bacteria on your plate and you come back after a couple of days and the whole thing is covered in bacteria. So, basic idea here, cells don't just come out of nowhere, they have to come from previously existing and living cells, okay? All right, guys, now for today, you're gonna rewatch the video if there was anything confusing, and we'll have a discussion, and then you guys are going to go and do your quiz that is going to be on what you learned from today. All right, guys, good luck.